There's a new wide receiver 2 in town, and his name is Darnell Mooney.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very, very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for far too long, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. You know, you may also know me as Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And appreciate everyone that makes this humble, illustrious podcast their first listen of the day or first watch of the day, right? We call those folks everydayers. And if you want to become an everydayer and be weeks ahead, streets ahead of the rest of the Falcons fan base, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we'll be talking later about the sort of market for pass rushers starting to dry up. And, you know, will the Falcons be aggressive going after someone like, say, Khalil Mack via trade, and some of the pitfalls, the pros and cons of that sort of move? We'll talk about if the newest addition to the Falcons wide receiver core is going to disrupt their plans or the possibility of taking a wide receiver with the 8th overall selection in the first round of the 2024 NFL draft, as we've previously discussed. But we'll start by talking about that newest addition at wide receiver. And that is, of course, the former Chicago Bears wide receiver, Darnell Mooney, who signed a 3-year or agreed to terms, let's say, because technically no one has signed anything yet. They've just agreed to terms, and then they will officially sign things come Wednesday, beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern time, but agreed to terms with a 3-year, $39 million contract with $26 million guaranteed. Now, when I initially saw the price tag for this, I thought it was a little high, right? I know Pro Football Focus's Brad Spielberger, who's one of the best in the biz at projecting contracts, projected Mooney to sign a 1-year sort of prove it deal for like $9 million a year. And so this is more than that, but this is about market value for what you've seen other wide receiver 2s go for this offseason so far. Gabe Davis signed basically an identical contract. I think he got like $2 million less in guaranteed money from the Jacksonville Jaguars earlier this week. And so, if I thought it was a tad high, it's like I'm not losing any sleep over. This is just the nature of the beast when it comes to free agency. But what Mooney's going to bring to the table here for the Falcons as their presumed number 2 wide receiver, given that price tag, he's going to add much needed speed. If you've been listening to this podcast for 6 months, right, or really a year, because it goes back to when the Falcons signed Mack Hollins a year ago, and we sat here on this podcast not blowing smoke up your butt about Mack Hollins, and now all of a sudden people are like, yeah, Mack Hollins didn't work out. I'm like, who told you that was probably going to be the case? But we've been talking about this team desperate need for speed at the wide receiver position. Mooney definitely provides that. I've joked before where it's like, if you don't run a 4.42 or faster, I don't want you on this team. Well, Darnell Mooney runs a 4.38, so he checks that box. He is a good route runner. He does a good job separating. But despite the fact that he is a quote-unquote burner from a speed standpoint, he hasn't been that productive as a deep threat, or at least a consistent producer as a deep threat so far in his NFL career, right? If you look at his catch rate on 20-plus yard throws across his 4 years, it's 26%. And typically good deep threats, typically that number goes above 40%. Now, again, some of that may not all be on Darnell Mooney, and maybe the supporting cast, but you compare that to, say, a Damiere Byrd, whose career catch rate on deep passes was 26%. Harry Douglas was 21%. And those numbers, as we saw Damiere Byrd do from time to time, and in rare occasions Harry Douglas do, they will make plays down the field, but it isn't something that they're known for. And part of that, I think, is owed to the fact that Darnell Mooney and those guys as well aren't necessarily the biggest guys. And typically, if you're going to be an undersized deep threat, you need to have like Deshaun Jackson, Tyreek Hill type of speed. So instead of running a 4.38, you kind of need to run a 4.28 type of speed. But we'll see if, getting Kirk Cousins, throwing him, those rare deep passes, as Kirk Cousins is not known for pushing the ball down the field. We'll see if he can be a little bit more efficient on those deep passes. Now, Mooney also has the added versatility of being able to play inside and outside. I think the last 2 years in Chicago under Matt Eberflus and Luke Getz, he has the play caller. He spent about 60% of his snaps in the slot. So that was kind of his primary role. But I think he can do whatever you want to do. And we'll talk a little bit more about his exact role in this offense, because I've seen some debate about that on Twitter from other folks. But his usage in the Luke Getsy offense gets us kind of to the big issue with Darnell Mooney, which is the last 2 years he has not been particularly productive. In fact, like if you combine his production over the last 2 years, it did not match the production he had in the final year of Matt Nagy's tenure in Chicago, who of course was the coach there, and of course our shadow GM Ryan Pace was also responsible for drafting Darnell Mooney in Chicago. So once again, Ryan Pace continues to be the man behind the throne when it comes to who's actually running the Atlanta Falcons. Joking, or am I? But Darnell Mooney had a 1,000-yard season in 2021, had 80 catches in that season, and you wonder, okay, how much of the decline the last couple of years, how much of that is the play calling and the scheme change with a new coaching staff? How much of that is the quarterback play? All right, the inconsistencies of Justin Fields that have been much debated over the last weeks, months, and years with that, as well as injuries, right? He did not necessarily finish either one of the 2022 and 23 seasons healthy, right? This past year, he missed those final 2 games of the season with concussion, and that meant that he didn't play against the Falcons in that Week 17 matchup this past year. And then I think he missed the final 5 games of the 2022 season with an ankle injury. So I think the Falcons, by giving Mooney this money in this contract, in this 3-year deal, that probably, when we get the details, will probably break down to like a 2-year contract, but we'll see. Or basically the Falcons are saying that they believe that the 2021 version of Darnell Mooney is the real Darnell Mooney by paying him, this quote unquote, number 2 wide receiver premium that we saw, Jacoby Myers signed for $11 million last year. And so you can say, okay, with the bump in salary cap, that's what the going rate for one of these guys is. So we'll see if Darnell Mooney lives up to that. I think he certainly has the capacity to do that, but we'll explore further what exactly Darnell Mooney's role is going to be within the Falcons offense based off of what we've seen the Rams do these last couple of years and what we're expecting Zac Robinson to do in the future years. And we'll also break down how his addition impacts the Falcons draft plans at the wide receiver position. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. I know if I had more time, I'd be grinding film, getting geared up for this illustrious 2024 Falcons season. But how would you use your extra time? And a better way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. And therapy can help you find that thing that is a priority, what matters to you, so that you can do more of it. Therapy has benefited me. BetterHelp has benefited me, teaching me coping skills like you can only control what you can control. And if you're looking for better ways to cope with the ups and downs of an NFL offseason or the ups and downs of life, give BetterHelp a try. If you're thinking of starting therapy, I can not recommend it enough. So it's entirely done online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp by visiting betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, want to plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel right here on YouTube, as well as available on Amazon Fire TV on the free Fire TV channels app, and check out Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel as well. So I was asked by a Locked On Falcons insider, and that's the beauty of being an insider. Link in the description below at joinsutext.com/LockedOnFalcons. Not only do you get access to, all 22 breakdowns of, the season and draft prospects. We're working on wide receivers right now. I think I'm probably going to do like a big comprehensive breakdown next week for those insiders on Kirk Cousins and Darnell Mooney and whoever else the Falcons add over the next couple of days in free agency. So check that out. But you also get that one-on-one connection, so you can hit me up for questions, right? You just want, hey, Aaron, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? That's what you can do. So check out Locked On Falcons Insider at the link in the description below. It's 14-day free trial and then $4.99 a month after that. But I was asked by someone who asked me, do I think Darnell Mooney is a slot receiver or a Z receiver? Meaning, Z, for those of you not knowing the terminology for wide receivers, typically you have X, the Z, in the slot, right? Sometimes the slot is called a Y. The X is the sort of classic big physical guy that lines up on the line of scrimmage, and it used to be called the split end back in the day. Julio Jones was an X, right? Drake London was drafted to be an X. AJ Brown was an X, right? That's kind of the prototypical type of X. A Z is more of a route runner. Calvin Ridley and Roddy White were Zs, the flanker or whatnot. And so basically my answer to this Locked On Falcons Insider was yes. Is he a slot or is he? Yeah, because he can do both, I think. And frankly, I don't know if it really matters all that much, right? Given my expectations for what this Falcons offense is going to look like under Zac Robinson, based off of what the Rams offense looked like, because the Rams over the years, like you knew Cooper Kupp spent the majority of his snaps in the slot, but in those prime years when that Rams offense was humming under Jared Goff, and the same is true now, even with Matt Stafford at the helm, Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks and Puka Nacua and all these other guys that are quote unquote outside guys that spend the bulk of their snaps outside do spend, 30, 40, 50% of their snaps playing in the slot. And the Rams, I don't think really have used that sort of strict dividing line between you're an X and you're a Z and you're a slot guy, and those are your primary solo solitary roles. They're just going to move you around, because part of it is what the Rams do is that they have condensed formations, right? And if you don't know what that means, typically your wide receiver is going to line up wide, right? That's why they're called wide receivers. But the Rams run those guys, and they're going to line up closer to the tackles, closer to the tight ends. And part of the reason why they do that is you get better angles on your run blocking. But the Rams, because they do all this, motion stuff and bunch formations, all like you can kind of trick defenses with different releases and stack concepts and all those various things out of those condensed formations, so you get a leg up. And I expect the Falcons to do quite a bit of that. I don't know if we'll see as much of it that the Rams use, because it feels like at various points the Rams do it like 90% of the time. The Vikings do it under Kevin O'Connell, but it doesn't appear that they do it like to that degree. So we'll see what Zac Robinson winds up doing. But because of that, I don't think it really matters if you're an X or a slot or a Z as much in their offense, is basically to say that. They're all kind of interchangeable in a lot of ways based off of my study of the Rams. Now, maybe as I watch more Rams offense over this offseason to get geared up for this illustrious 2024 season, my opinion may change on that. So I think trying to pigeonhole, Mooney's role to a specific spot, I don't think makes a ton of sense right now. And I think, a lot of it may be tied to who else the Falcons add at wide receiver. Like if they go out there and get another quote unquote slot receiver, then you'll probably see Mooney spend more time on the outside. If they go out there and get more of a outside receiver, using again the air quotes, then you'll probably see Mooney spend quite a bit of time in the slot. So we'll just sort of have to see. I think the Falcons will sort of, hopefully, this is the thing you hope all coaching staffs do, they will put their players in the best position to succeed. So we'll see about that. But the question is, will it take wide receiver off the table in round one? I don't think it does, because again, the Falcons have a best player available BPA strategy. That's not going to change just because they spent a little bit of money on Darnell Mooney. I think really what's going to impact this is if the Falcons go out in free agency and sign another wide receiver, and you also see them spend premium dollars on a wide receiver 3. And it won't necessarily mean that like they're going to change their draft strategy, but it may indicate that the Falcons aren't maybe as high on the wide receivers at the top of the draft as other people are, and they want to make sure that they get their 3 guys, right? And we've talked before about given the propensity of the Rams offense to use 11 personnel, and I've stated before that I don't think the Falcons are going to lean into the 11 personnel to the degree that the Rams have historically done so. They're going to be more like what the Rams were in 2019 and 2020 with a lot more 12 personnel. People don't realize that the Rams led the NFL in 2 tight end sets usage in 2020 and were 11th in 2019 when they had Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee. And we've discussed before on how sort of Charlie Warner is going to be our blocking tight end. And, Kyle Pitts is going to be our receiving tight end. That's Gerald Everett. I don't want to compare them the same because Tyler Higbee was technically the starter, but he was the blocker. But you get what I'm saying. So we're going to see a lot of 11 personnel. And what that means, though, is that you're going to see the Falcons carry 6 wide receivers on their roster in all likelihood. And they only have 2 right now in Mooney and Drake London. No offense, Josh Ali or Austin Mack or any of those guys. But that means that they're still probably going to add 4 wide receivers this offseason. And we've talked before about how that possibly could result in double dipping in free agency and double dipping as well in the draft to get those 4 guys, right? Getting 2 in free agency, 2 in the draft. You've already got 1 in free agency. So I do think probably we'll get another wide receiver signing in free agency. And, if we see them spend a premium, like if they go after Josh Reynolds or Tyler Boyd or Curtis Samuel, some of the names that I've heard people suggest as potential options for the Falcons on the radar. And let's say they pay those guys, a sizable market value contract, let's say like 3 years, $25 million. That's going to be the situation where I go, oh, okay, maybe the Falcons aren't as high on these wide receivers as everybody else is. So we'll see about that. But, let's be clear. The path to wide receiver at 8 really is just mostly dependent on how the board falls. And I want to make that clear to folks. It's not as if it's definitely going to be a wide receiver at 8. There's a very high probability that wide receiver, one of those top 3 wide receivers, and we're referring to Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State, Rome Odunze of Washington, and Malik Neighbors of LSU, who are sort of consensus top 5, top 6 prospects in the draft. And I've talked before about how the Falcons typically draft, when you go back and look at their drafts, they tend to draft based off of consensus. And so if one of those 3 guys is there, I think the Falcons will definitely think long and hard at taking one of those guys. But the only real way, and to me, the most realistic way where one of those guys does slide to 8 is if we get a 4th quarterback, Michigan's JJ McCarthy, most likely going in the top 7, right? That if we just get 3 quarterbacks, a tackle, Joe Alt of Notre Dame, then there's 3 more spots, and those are likely to be those 3 wide receivers. And so that's what you kind of need. So we'll see if that happens, right? This Minnesota, now that they've lost on Kirk Cousins, do they try to trade up into the top 7 to get JJ McCarthy if the quarterbacks go 1, 2, and 3 in this draft, like most people think? Or does the Giants, even despite getting Drew Lock today, I think, as their backup quarterback behind Daniel Jones, do they take a swing on JJ McCarthy at 6 or something like that? So we'll see. Again, wouldn't spend too much energy worrying about it now. We'll, as we get closer to the draft in 6 weeks, we'll have a better idea of how the draft is going to go. But, we can endlessly speculate about that. So I do think Darnell Mooney, like if you ask me, do I think the odds of the Falcons take a wide receiver at 8 went down today by signing Darnell Mooney? Yes. Do I think it moved the needle more than like 5%? I would say no. So we'll see just how it all plays out for the Falcons in the draft. But, this leads to folks wanting the Falcons potentially, now that they have wide receiver, quote unquote, figured out. Again, they still got to add 4 more wide receivers to their roster. So it ain't anywhere close to being figured out, guys. But, now that perception is, hey, now we can focus on pass rusher in the draft. But maybe the Falcons want to focus on pass rusher in free agency as well. So we'll break down whether or not the Falcons really have a chance to get a good pass rusher with the well seemingly drying up as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, comedy, music, and theater near you. And they have killer last-minute deals, so you can buy tickets in seconds right up to the start of the event. All-in prices means you're not going to get hit with hidden fees. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And don't forget Game Time's guarantee, which means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, they will credit you 110% the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app Create an account and use code Locked On, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So, wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, let's talk about the pass rush. Of course, tomorrow's first listen, we'll be talking more about whatever free agent moves, and we'll get official announcements and all that stuff on tomorrow night's episode. As I mentioned at the end of yesterday's episode, this week we'll probably be going much later on the YouTube side of things on when you can get to check this out. Usually we try to run YouTube, that first airing at 7 p.m. Eastern time, but we'll probably be doing more 9 and 10 o'clock shows this week so that we can make sure that, we have you all caught up on the latest moves heading into the next day. So just be aware of that for you guys that are everydayers on the YouTube side of things. But for the audio listeners, life goes on. The world will keep spinning for you guys. But the world isn't spinning for the Falcons pass rush, right? Because we talked yesterday about, hey, a lot of pass rushers got signed yesterday. A lot of edge rushers specifically got signed yesterday, but there's still plenty of options left. And basically half of the options I mentioned that were left signed today, that included Danielle Hunter to the Texans, Shaq Barrett to the Colts, I think. I can't remember who he signed with, and Josh Uche going back to New England. And, I saw some rumors online that the Falcons definitely were in on Danielle Hunter, but he spurned them to go to Houston, similar to what I've heard in the past where the Falcons were in on Marcus Davenport last year, but he spurned them to go to Minnesota. And then Robert Quinn did the same thing back in 2020 to go to Chicago. And the Falcons wound up settling for our favorite Florida Gator, Dante Fowler Jr. But, the other two names that I mentioned as still available out there are Chase Young and Carl Lawson. Chase Young is taking some visits to Carolina and the Saints, and I think some other team that I'm blanking on. He's going old school, right? He's actually visiting these teams in order to pick where he wants to play next. So we'll see if the Falcons get on the Chase Young docket. I know some of you guys are like, "What, Aaron? Don't you hate Chase Young?" I don't hate Chase Young. I just thought he was not the generational transcendent talent that people hyped him up to be coming into the NFL. And I feel like 4 years later that has been proven true. But just remember, I was the first one there. I was sitting here on a podcast. I devoted half a podcast in December of 2020 talking about Pro Bowlers to basically take shots at Chase Young. And I've died on a hill ever since. But I wouldn't definitely not be against the Falcons adding him at this point in time. They need it, and it would be funny, if the Falcons, after me going hard before free agency in 2021, to be like, we need to get Carl Lawson. He's the guy, right? I think it was him and Joe Tooney were the two guys. I'm like, we have to sign these two guys that offseason. Obviously, the Falcons didn't spin, but it would be funny if 3 years later we were able to just sort of get that guy. But we also mentioned the possibility of the Falcons trading for guys, and you have the Jay Rodgers connection, the Falcons' current D-line coach, who was recently with the Chargers, coaching Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, presumably. And you have the Mack connection with, of course, the shadow GM, Ryan Pace, who traded for Khalil Mack back in 2018 when he was the GM of the Bears. It makes sense for the Falcons to pursue one of these guys. Let's talk about Khalil Mack for a second, right? Especially given that he's coming off a very productive year. Joey Bosa on the other hand, Khalil Mack's 33, Joey Bosa's, I still think, 29. So Bosa's the younger guy, but Bosa's also been very injury prone these last 2 years. He's missed 60% of his games due to injuries in the last 2 years. So there is a little bit of a buyer's beware on Joey Bosa there. And I know you Falcon fans are really worried about injured players because based off of how you think about Kirk Cousins. So I know none of you guys would be pushing for the Falcons to trade for Joey Bosa because you definitely do not want to pay for injured players. But to me, a Khalil Mack trade would be interesting because he's going to be 33. He's in a contract year. So if you do acquire him, you're going to probably have to extend him somehow in some way. And then we sort of look at the precedent for what an extension for Khalil Mack might look like. And again, I'm guessing that you're looking at Von Miller from a couple of years ago, right? And that's also kind of a template for a trade, right? Von Miller got traded from the Broncos to the Rams back in 2021 when he was 32 for a second and third round pick. And then the next year when he became a free agent, the Bills signed him to a $20 million a year contract. And so I would assume if you're the Chargers and you're like, Khalil Mack just had 17 and a half sacks or whatever it was, that was like top 5 in the NFL this past year. We want comparable compensation back for that, right? You know, you're not going to trade him for a fifth. I would not think. But the question for the Falcons, you know, if you're trading for Khalil Mack, how confident are you that you're going to get the 2023 version of Khalil Mack? That if you do, that's a home run. He was a top 5 pass rusher last year, again, 17 sacks. But then again, there's also the possibility that he might be the 2022 version of Khalil Mack, which was still a good player, still certainly would be the best pass rusher on the Atlanta Falcons, but is probably not a guy that's worth that type of premium where you're going to give up potentially 2 day 2 picks and also pay him $20 million plus over the next, you know, couple of years, right? So I'd be curious again, you know, whether or not we get the he's too old rhetoric from this fan base if the Falcons were to pull off such a move, you know, like that we have gotten when they pulled off another move the other day. So I would just be curious. Now, of course, you know, I'm sure the comments are, you know, afire with people saying it's different, Aaron, because Kirk Cousins, if you're not picking up what I'm putting down, is coming off an Achilles injury and Khalil Mack is healthy. You know, but yeah, I get that. You know, I understand, guys. Just, you know, riling up the folks as I like to do. But it's just interesting to me because, like, I would bet most people would be like, who cares? We're desperate for a pass rush. And I would argue, like, so were the Falcons when it came to the quarterback position. So if you can wrap your head around the Falcons trading for Khalil Mack, you should be able to wrap your head around the Falcons trading for Kirk Cousins. I don't think, you know, again, I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that insist it's night and day different. It's totally different. But I'm just saying I don't think it's as different as those people would make it. You know, the principle is still the same. It's just the details. But we'll see on that front. Again, Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat are still out there as well. If the Falcons are looking for maybe a little bit younger player, that I'm not as convinced that, you know, again, I don't know what the Chargers will be willing to accept for Khalil Mack. There's a good probability that the Chargers may wind up cutting Khalil Mack tomorrow, right? They'll you know, make calls and trying to unload him, hoping that someone's going to give up value for him and, you know, basically get to the front of the line so that, you know, that's the reason why you would, if you're the Falcons, why you would trade the value, because if they cut Khalil Mack, you're not guaranteed to land him, right? He becomes a free agent and he can choose his destination, just like, you know, reportedly, allegedly, Danielle Hunter just did, where, you know, he chose not to come to Atlanta. And so that would be the part of the variable that will be interesting to sort of see. But we'll see how the Falcons address their pass rush. Again, I know a lot of people just say, okay, well, we'll just draft somebody. And it's like, that's fine. Like, you know, I want to make it clear to anybody out there, like, I'm not anti the Falcons drafting a pass rusher. I just happen to think, you know, Malik Neighbors is special. And I happen to think that if Roma Dunze is on the board, then, you know, they'll be all over that guy. But, you know, not here. I'm not anti Dallas Turner out of Alabama or Jared Verse out of Florida State or Layatu Latu out of UCLA. I like all of those guys as pass rushers. My issue is just like, if you don't get one of those guys at 8, you're not really doing anything with the pass rush. And so to me, there needs to be a sense of urgency when it comes to addressing the pass rush in March, as opposed to waiting till April, because, you know, if the board doesn't fall a certain way, you know, we're running it back with Arnold Ebiketie and D'Angelo Malone. And it's like, I know there's a vocal segment of the fan base that, you know, thinks that that's going to absolutely work out, but I ain't part of that that segment. So we'll see how that goes. So we will see how the Falcons address the pass rush as well as other holes in free agency as the week unfolds. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. We'll be back with more tomorrow. Any updates, any, you know, contract details? We did get details on Kirk Cousins' contract, but basically what I said on yesterday's episode, nothing's changed. It's just the exact numbers are basically, it still, to me, boils down to probably being a 3-year contract due to the probability that the Falcons will restructure Kirk's deal next year. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But that's going to do it for us, guys. I really appreciate you. We'll be back with more. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Sports Today, Locked On NFL for your second listens. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.